The fluorescent lights of Hartman's grocery had been flickering for 9 years, and Maren Holloway had stopped noticing them somewhere around year 3. They buzzed above her register like tired insects casting their pale, unforgiving glow over the conveyor belt, over the rows of canned soup and discount cereal over her hands as they moved across the scanner with the mechanical precision of someone who had memorized the rhythm of survival. It was a Thursday afternoon in late March, and Cleveland was refusing to let go of winter. Through the wide front windows of the store, the parking lot stretched out gray and unwelcoming. Patches of old snow clung stubbornly to the edges of the asphalt, refusing to melt, refusing to surrender. The sky above hung low in the color of wet cement. Maren rang up a customer. Milk, white bread, a box of generic Raisin Bran. The total flashed on the screen. 1947. 1947, she said, and the cheerfulness in her voice was a practiced thing. A small mercy she offered the world, even when the world rarely offered it back. The customer handed her a 20 without looking up. Maren made change. Her fingers ached. They had been aching since the start of her shift 6 hours ago, and they would continue to ache for the next 4. After that, when her shift ended at 7, she would drive across town to the office building on West 6th Street and clean the 14th floor for the accounting firm that paid her $11 an hour to make their messes disappear. She would not get home until nearly midnight. She was 36 years old, and her body felt 60. The check engine light on her sedan had been on for 3 weeks. She had not taken the car to a mechanic. She could not afford to know what was wrong. The car was 15 years old, the same age it had been when she bought it used after the divorce, and it ran the way old things run when you ask too much of them. It complained. It threatened. It kept going. Through the front window, Maren watched a young mother in the parking lot wrestle a toddler into a car seat. The child arched its small back and screamed. The mother bent over it, patient and exhausted the way mothers do. Maren felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Wren was at home. Wren was 11 now. 11 and growing like something the universe was trying to push toward the sky. 11 and probably sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework right now, or staring into the refrigerator hoping a miracle had occurred since she last checked. Maren had left a 20 on the counter that morning with a note. Pizza money. As if that made it acceptable. As if frozen pepperoni could substitute for the kind of childhood a girl like Wren deserved. The automatic doors slid open with their soft pneumatic sigh, and a gust of cold March air came in. And with it came Mrs. Eulalia Hartwick. Mrs. Hartwick lived 2 streets over from the apartment building where Maren and Wren lived. She was 78 and walked with a cane and had the kind of voice that carried memories of cigarettes she had quit 40 years ago. She was kind. The worst kind of kind. The kind that noticed. "Maren, dear," she said, setting her basket on the conveyor belt. "How are you holding up?" "Just fine, Mrs. Hartwick. How are you today?" The older woman's eyes lingered on Maren's face, took in the shadows beneath her eyes, the way the uniform hung looser than it had last month. "You work too hard, sweetheart. You need to take care of yourself." Maren nodded. She had heard variations of this sentence countless times in her life. Take care of yourself. Rest more. Ask for help. The words came from good people, well-meaning people, people who could not see that advice. Without money attached to it, was just another small weight on the pile she was already carrying. "I'm doing okay," Marin said, bagging the groceries with quick automatic hands. "Ren keeps me going. That girl is lucky to have you." Mrs. Hartwick paid. Then she paused at the end of the counter and her face did something soft, something Marin recognized and dreaded. "I heard about your Aunt Marin. I'm so sorry for your loss." The words landed in Marin's chest like a stone dropped into deep water. The ripple moved through her slowly. Aunt Adelaide. Aunt Addie, who had died 3 weeks ago, slipped away in her sleep at 78, the way some people are lucky enough to go alone in her cluttered house at the edge of town. Marin had not seen her in over a year. Life had its way of putting distance between people, even people you loved, even family. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwick," Marin said. Her voice did not shake. She had learned somewhere along the way how to keep it from shaking. Mrs. Hartwick patted her hand once gently and was gone. Marin stood at her register for a long moment after the older woman left, letting the grief move through her in small, manageable waves. Aunt Adelaide Pemberton had been her father's older sister, a strange, soft-spoken woman who had lived alone in a sprawling old house on Ridgewood Lane, surrounded by furniture and clutter and silence. As a child, Marin had visited her on Sunday afternoons, and Aunt Addie had always pressed warm cookies into her hands and shown her things. Old things. A music box that played a tune from before the war. A wooden chest with a hidden drawer. A glass paperweight that had a tiny scene of Paris frozen inside it. To Marin's siblings, the house had been a joke, a junkyard, a place to escape from as quickly as politeness allowed. But Marin had loved that house. She had loved the smell of it, the dust and the lavender and the faint mustiness of old fabric. She had loved the way Aunt Addie's eyes lit up when she talked about a piece of furniture or a painting or a brooch. She had loved the way the old woman had treated her, not like a child, but like a person worth speaking to. But then, her parents had died one after the other, both before Marin turned 22. Then her marriage to Russell had fallen apart. Then Ren had been born, and survival had become the only language Marin knew. The Sunday visits had stopped. The cookies had stopped. The connection had thinned to a thread, and then to nothing, and then Aunt Addie had died in her sleep. And Marin had stood at the funeral 3 weeks ago, in a thrift store black dress, feeling like a stranger at her own family's gathering. The funeral had been small. Her older brother Garrett had been there in a suit that probably cost more than Marin's monthly rent, talking too loudly about a real estate deal he had just closed in Shaker Heights. Her younger sister Camille had been there, with her husband the dentist, and her Hermes scarf and her pity smile. Their cousin Tate, Aunt Addie's favorite, the charming one, the one who had never held a real job, had been there too, looking bored. They had stood in the cemetery together, those four connected by blood, and almost nothing else. And when Walter Ainsworth, Aunt Addie's lawyer, had quietly mentioned that there would be a reading of the will, Marin had watched the way her siblings' faces had changed. Grief had stepped aside. Interest had stepped forward. Something hungry had moved behind their eyes. The will reading was tomorrow, Saturday morning. Marin had already arranged to take the morning off, even though it meant losing 4 hours she could not afford to lose. Family obligation demanded her presence, even if that family had barely spoken to her in years, even if she already knew with the heavy certainty of a woman who had spent her life being overlooked that she would not be getting anything that mattered. The shift wore on. Customers came and went. The fluorescent lights buzzed. At 6:15, an older woman approached Marin's register with a single carton of milk and a sympathy card. Marin did not recognize her at first. She was small and silver-haired in a gray wool coat that had seen many winters. Her eyes were a pale, watery blue, and they were looking at Marin with an expression that did not belong on a stranger's face. "You're Adelaide's niece," the woman said. It was not a question. Marin froze. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do I know you?" "No, dear. But I knew her." The woman set the milk and the card down gently. She did not move to pay. "I worked for her years ago, just for a little while. Bookkeeping. She was a private person, your aunt, but she spoke of you often." Marin's hands had gone still over the scanner. "She did. Every week near the end. She would say your name. She would say, 'Marin is the one who understands. Marin is the one who deserves better than what this family has given her.'" The woman paused. Her eyes were kind and very steady. "I just wanted you to know that." "Before." "Before what?" The woman smiled a small, sad smile. "Before tomorrow, I imagine. She had her reasons for everything, your aunt. She always did. Just remember that, dear." She placed $3 on the counter for the milk, picked up the card, without it being scanned, and walked out of the store before Marin could think to ask her name. Marin stood at her register. The fluorescent light flickered above her. Through the front window, she watched the small, silver-haired woman cross the parking lot, climb into a sensible beige car, and drive away. She did not know it yet, but that was the first moment the world began to shift. The funeral had been held on a Saturday morning at Briarwood Cemetery, under a sky the color of dishwater. Marin had stood at the edge of the small gathering holding Wren's hand, and she had watched her family from a distance, even though they were standing only 10 feet away. Garrett had been the loudest. He always was. He had stood near the casket with his hands clasped in front of him, the Rolex on his wrist, catching what little light the day allowed. And he had nodded gravely at things the minister said, while his thumb tapped his other hand in the quick, impatient rhythm of a man who was already mentally somewhere else. He was 41. He had been in real estate for 15 years. He talked about money the way some men talked about religion, as though it were a thing that justified itself. Camille had stood beside him, 33 years old, in a black dress that had been tailored and a coat that had been imported, and her face had been arranged into the precise expression of a woman performing grief. Her husband, Bradley, the dentist, had stood beside her in a charcoal overcoat and had not said a single word the entire morning. He never did. Marin had sometimes wondered if Bradley was a person at all, or just a very expensive suit Camille had arranged on a hanger. Tate had been there too, in a leather jacket that was wrong for a funeral, scrolling through his phone whenever he thought no one was looking. He was 30. He had been Aunt Addie's favorite, the charming nephew, the golden boy, who had never paid her back the $4,000 she had loaned him in 2019, and Marin had stood apart from them. In her thrift store black dress, with Wren beside her in a coat that was a size too small. and she had watched her own family the way a stranger watches a play she does not have a ticket to. When the service ended, when the minister closed his book and the small crowd began to disperse toward their warm cars, an old woman approached the grave. She was tall and thin in her late 80s, with white hair pulled back into a careful bun and a hand-knit gray shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She walked slowly with the help of a wooden cane, and she carried no flowers, no card, no purse. She walked directly to Marin. "You must be Marin," the old woman said. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Imogene Drexler. I was your aunt's neighbor for 32 years. Marin shook the woman's hand. The skin was thin as paper and warm. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Drexler." "Oh, child, the loss is yours. I lost a neighbor. You lost something more." The old woman's blue eyes searched Marin's face. There was something in that look that Marin could not name. Something patient. Something waiting. "I have something to say to you, dear, and I want you to remember it." "Yes, ma'am. Adelaide spoke of you every week. For the last 10 years of her life, she spoke of you. She would sit on her porch in the summer evenings and tell me, 'Imogene, my niece Marin, is the only one who knows the difference between price and value. The only one. The rest of them only know what things cost.' Marin could not breathe. She wanted me to tell you that, whenever I had the chance. So I'm telling you now." The old woman patted her arm once and stepped past her toward the line of cars waiting at the cemetery gate. Marin stood where she had been left. Wren looked up at her mother, 11 years old and already learning to read the silences in the air. Mama, who was that? A friend of Aunt Addie's baby. She said nice things. "Yes. Why are you crying?" Marin had not realized she was crying. She did not answer. She knelt down on the cold ground of the cemetery and pulled her daughter into her arms and held her there for a long moment. And across the graveyard, her siblings climbed into their warm cars and drove away, and not one of them looked back to see if she was still standing there. Saturday morning arrived cold and pale. Marin put on the black dress for the second time in 3 weeks, made Wren a bowl of cereal, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and drove across town to the offices of Ainsworth and Tibbet at 442 Euclid Avenue. The building was old brick, 4 stories tall with tall windows that looked out over a small park where the trees had not yet remembered how to grow leaves. She fed quarters into the parking meter, counting them out. Enough for 1 hour. She could not afford more. The reception area was hushed and carpeted in dark green, the kind of place where money spoke quietly. A young woman directed her to a conference room on the 2nd floor. When Marin entered, the others were already there. Garrett sat at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair, as though it belonged to him. Camille sat to his right, scrolling through her phone. Tate slouched at the far end, looking bored. And at the foot of the table sat Walter Ainsworth, 70 years old, in a charcoal suit and wire-rimmed glasses, with the quiet manner of a man who had been keeping family secrets for 50 years. And was very good at it. He stood when Marin entered. "Mrs. Holloway, thank you for coming. Please sit." She took a seat across from Camille. She felt instantly the way she always felt at family events. Underdressed, out of place. A woman who had wandered into the wrong room. "Good of you to make it, Marin," Garrett said. "I had to switch a shift." "Of course." He said it the way you might say, of course, about a small and pitiable thing. Mr. Ainsworth cleared his throat. Shall we begin? He opened a leather folder. Inside was a single document no more than 4 pages typed neatly. He spoke without inflection. He had done this many times. The decedent Adelaide Catherine Pemberton of 218 Ridgewood Lane executed her last will and testament on November 12, 2023. The estate consists of the following declared assets. Liquid assets in checking and savings accounts totaling $43,200. The residence and grounds at 218 Ridgewood Lane valued for tax purposes at $195,000. The contents of the residence valued in aggregate at approximately $58,000. Camille had put her phone down. Garrett had stopped tapping. The decedent specified the following distribution. The liquid assets totaling $43,200 shall be divided equally between Garrett Holloway and Camille Sullivan Vance. Garrett did not smile. He had practiced not smiling. The residence upon its sale shall produce proceeds to be divided equally between Garrett Holloway, Camille Sullivan Vance, and Tate Pemberton. Tate sat up. $65,000 each, maybe more. He nodded slowly as though to a song only he could hear. The contents of the residence shall be distributed as follows. Mr. Ainsworth read on. The dining set, the leather club chairs, the mahogany writing desk, the Tiffany lamp, the Persian runner, the grandfather clock, the china cabinet, the gilt mirror. Each item, each piece was assigned. Garrett, Camille, Tate. Garrett, Camille Tate. Marin listened to her own name not being spoken, and she let it happen. She had expected this. She had practiced expecting this. She was good at it. The lawyer paused. He turned the page. And finally, his eyes lifted from the page and found Marin's face. To my niece Marin Holloway, I bequeath the carved oak armoire from the guest bedroom of the residence at 218 Ridgewood Lane. It is to be delivered into her possession within 30 days of probate, and is not to be sold, donated, or surrendered to any other party. The room was silent for a second, maybe 2. Then Garrett laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the bright, sharp laugh of a man who had been hoping for exactly this. The laugh of a man who had spent his whole life being correct about his sister, and was now being correct in public. The armoire, Garrett said. She gave you the armoire. Camille covered her mouth with her hand. Her shoulders shook. That awful old thing, Camille said. Marin, oh my God. I'm so sorry. Tate snorted softly. Doesn't that thing weigh like 400 pounds? 5, Garrett said. And it's worth about $50 at a garage sale. If that. Marin's face was on fire. She kept her eyes on the table, on the small grain of the wood, on the place where someone had once set down a coffee cup and left a faint, perfect circle. Mr. Ainsworth did not laugh. He did not smile. He sat very still, and his eyes behind the wire-rimmed glasses did not leave Marin's face. Mrs. Holloway, he said quietly, your aunt was quite specific. The armoire is yours. There are no other terms. Lucky you, Marin, Garrett said. You can put a tablecloth over it. Use it as a divider in that apartment of yours. Garrett, Camille said, but she was still smiling. What I'm being supportive. Maren lifted her eyes. She looked at her brother, at his Rolex, his salon haircut, his confidence that the world had been built to please him. She looked at Camille, who had once been a small fat girl, who had cried when other children teased her at school, and who had since rebuilt herself into something cold and lacquered and unrecognizable. She looked at Tate, who had never worked a day in his life and was about to receive $65,000 for the crime of existing. She thought for a moment about standing up and walking out. She did not. "I'll take it," she said. Garrett raised his eyebrows. "Seriously, Maren, come on. You don't have room for it. Just let them donate it. Save yourself the back pain." "I said I'll take it." Her voice was quiet. It did not shake. The fluorescent lights of 9 years had taught her how to do that. Mr. Ainsworth nodded once. He turned to the others. "The remainder of the bequests will be coordinated by my office over the next several weeks. Mrs. Sullivan, Vance, Mr. Holloway, Mr. Pemberton, you will each receive contact from my paralegal regarding logistics. Mrs. Holloway," he turned back to Maren, "a word if you have a moment. Before you go." The others stood. They were already talking past her, over her, around her. Garrett was on his phone. Camille was telling Bradley something about movers. Tate was asking when the house would actually sell, because he had some bills. Maren watched them file out. When the door closed behind them, Walter Ainsworth folded his hands on the table and looked at her. "Your aunt left instructions," he said, "that I was to deliver to you privately, not the others. Instructions. She said, and I am quoting her directly, 'Tell Maren to look closely. Tell her not in front of them. Tell her when she is alone.'" He held her gaze. "That is the message. I do not know what it means." She would not explain. She only said that you would understand in time. Maren did not speak. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, slow and heavy. "I will say one more thing, Mrs. Holloway. Off the record. Your aunt was a careful woman. She did nothing by accident. If she gave you the armoire, she meant for you to have it, whatever that means." He stood. He extended his hand. "My condolences, Mrs. Holloway." Truly. She shook his hand. It was warm and dry, and it lingered just a moment longer than a handshake had to. Out in the parking lot, the meter had run out. There was a ticket on her windshield. $45. She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, slipped it into her coat pocket, and got into her car. The check engine light came on. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel. She did not cry. She had stopped crying in front of buildings years ago. It took her 3 days to find someone with a truck. She called Russell on Tuesday night after Wren had gone to bed. The phone rang 4 times and she almost hoped he would not answer. Maren. His voice was the same as it had always been. Bored. Annoyed. Resigned. "Russell, I need a favor." "Of course you do." She closed her eyes and asked. She explained the armoire. She explained the will. She did not explain what Walter Ainsworth had said in the conference room about looking closely. She did not yet know what she would have said. "I'll pay you for gas," she said when she had finished. "You don't have to pay me, Maren. I'll do it for Wren." Those words. He always used those words. I'll do it for Wren. As though he were performing some quiet sainthood for an audience of one. As though loving the child he had helped make were a generosity he was bestowing upon her mother. Marin had learned a long time ago how to swallow those words without letting them taste like anything. Saturday morning, she said. 9. Fine. He hung up. Saturday came gray and cold and stubborn. Russell pulled up in his battered Ford pickup at 10 minutes after 9. He did not get out of the cab. He just sat there with the engine running, looking at the apartment building as though it were something he wanted to drive away from. Marin climbed in beside him and gave him the address. They drove to the edge of town. Ridgewood Lane sat at the far end of the old part of Cleveland, where the streets curved instead of grid-lined, and the houses had been built before the First World War. Aunt Addie's house was at the end of the road, set back from the street behind a tall hedge of overgrown lilac. The hedge had not been trimmed since the previous summer. The bare gray branches reached out into the lane as though the house itself were trying to hold the road back. Marin had the key Walter Ainsworth had given her. The lock turned slowly the way old locks do. The inside of the house was exactly as she remembered it from childhood. Dim and warm-smelling, full of dark wood and faded velvet. Even now, 3 weeks after Adelaide's death, the air still carried a trace of her perfume. Lavender and something sweeter underneath. Something like dried roses. Russell whistled. Christ, this place is like a museum. Marin did not answer. She was already walking. She passed through the front hall where a tall walnut hat rack stood empty, and a small framed embroidery hung at eye level. The kind of stitched scripture her aunt's mother had probably made in the 1930s. She passed through the parlor where the Tiffany lamp still sat on its mahogany table, where the leather club chairs still faced the cold fireplace, where the grandfather clock in the corner had not been wound in 3 weeks, and stood silent. Its hands stopped at 4:17. She did not know which afternoon. She did not know which morning. Just 4:17. She paused at the mantel. Across the top of the mantelpiece, in a row of mismatched frames, stood Aunt Addie's collection of photographs. Marin had seen most of them before. Her grandparents in front of a black 1942 sedan. Her father as a young man in a Navy uniform. Aunt Addie herself in her 30s, standing in front of the house with one hand shading her eyes. But there was one photograph Marin did not remember. It was small, black and white. The frame was simple silver tarnished at the corners. Inside the frame, Aunt Addie stood very young, perhaps 20, on a beach somewhere in a pale dress that the wind was lifting at the hem. Beside her stood a young man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with red hair the color of new copper, and a face that was laughing. His hand was on her waist. She was looking up at him. Her face was something Marin had never seen on her aunt's face in life. Marin picked up the frame. She turned it over. On the back, in faded pencil and handwriting she recognized as Aunt Addie's, were the words, Atlantic City, June 1965. She stood with the photograph in her hand for a long moment. She did not know the man. She had never seen him. Aunt Addie had never married as far as Marin had ever been told. Aunt Addie had been the spinster, the strange aunt, the one who lived alone with her furniture. Marin slipped the photograph into the inside pocket of her coat. She did not know why. She just knew that it belonged to her now, that it had been waiting. "Marin," Russell called from the back of the house. "Is this the thing?" She followed his voice down the hallway to the guest bedroom. The armoire stood against the far wall. It was taller than she remembered. Nearly to the ceiling, 8 feet at least, broad and dark and heavy as the door of an old church. It was carved from oak deeply by some hand that had been patient. Roses climbed up the front panels and across the doors. Leaves and vines twined into the corners. 2 brass handles tarnished to a dull green hung from the doors. At the very top of the piece, a small carved face peered out from a wreath of leaves, half hidden, watching. Russell put his hands on his hips. "You are out of your mind, Marin. There is no way this thing is going up your stairs. It's going up. It weighs as much as a car. It's going up." He let out a long breath and shook his head and started looking for screws to remove on the decorative crown molding. Marin stood very still and looked at the piece her aunt had given her. It did not look like junk to her. It had never looked like junk. It looked like something that had been waiting a long time. They worked for 2 hours. They emptied the inside of the armoire. Russell pulled out yellowed bed sheets, a stack of old wool blankets that smelled of cedar, a single wooden hanger with nothing on it. They unscrewed the heavy crown molding from the top. They worked the brass handles off the doors. They tied the doors shut with old rope. They angled the piece with terrible effort away from the wall. It still felt impossible to move. By the time they had it tilted onto a furniture Dolly Russell had brought from the truck, Marin's lower back was burning and her hands were trembling. She stepped out onto the front porch to breathe. That was when she saw the old woman. Mrs. Imogene Drexler was standing at the edge of the lilac hedge. She wore the same gray shawl she had worn at the cemetery, and she was leaning on her cane, and she was watching the house with the still patient watchfulness of a person who had been waiting for someone for a very long time. Marin walked down the porch steps. "Mrs. Drexler, you came back." "I came back for the armoire." "Yes, she said you would." The old woman lifted her free hand and held it out palm up. In her palm sat a small sealed envelope. It was cream-colored expensive, and on the front, in Aunt Addie's elegant handwriting, was Marin's name. "She gave this to me 4 months ago. She said, 'Imogene. When Marin comes to take the armoire, you give her this. Not before. After.' She was very firm about it. After." Marin reached out and took the envelope. It was light. It felt like nothing. It felt like everything. "Mrs. Drexler, why did she—" The old woman shook her head once. "That's not for me to say, child. I am only the messenger. But I will tell you this." She leaned forward on her cane. Her pale blue eyes were very steady. "She loved you more than you ever knew. And she was afraid of your brother and sister. So whatever is inside that envelope, you read it when you are alone. Do you understand me, Marin, alone?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good girl." The old woman patted her hand once and turned and made her slow way back down the lane toward her own front porch. Marin stood with the envelope in her hand, and she did not open it. Not yet. She slipped it into the inside pocket of her coat, beside the photograph from the mantelpiece, and she walked back to the truck. Russell was already swearing. The drive back to the apartment was silent. The armoire stood in the bed of the truck like a black coffin tied with ropes that Russell promised would hold. Behind them, low gray clouds had moved in across Cleveland, and a fine spitting rain had begun. By the time they reached the apartment building on Hawthorne Street, Marin's coat was damp at the shoulders and her hair was sticking to her forehead. Getting the armoire up 3 flights of stairs was the worst thing she had ever helped do. The stairwell was narrow. The ceilings were low. They had to pivot the piece on every landing, scraping paint off the walls, leaving long, pale gouges in the plaster. A neighbor opened her door on the 2nd floor and stood watching with crossed arms. Another opened on the 3rd and shut it again quickly. Russell cursed under his breath without pause. Marin did not have the strength to curse. She just held her end of the piece and breathed and moved and held and breathed. When they finally wrestled it into Wren's small bedroom and stood it upright against the wall, the entire apartment seemed to hold its breath. The armoire filled the room. It dominated it. It made every other piece of furniture look like a toy. Russell stood in the doorway. He was sweating. So was she. "There," he said. "There's your inheritance. Thank you, Russell. It's a piece of junk. I know what you think." He looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across his face. Maybe pity. Maybe something else. He did not say it, whatever it was. "Tell Wren I said hi. I will." He left. She heard him on the stairs. She heard the truck door slam. She heard the engine start and pull away and fade down Hawthorne Street and around the corner and gone. Marin stood alone in her daughter's bedroom with the armoire in front of her, and she put her hand on the carved oak, and she felt the smooth, worn surface under her palm, and the wood was warm. That afternoon, Wren came home from her friend's apartment downstairs, and the moment she saw the armoire, her face changed. She walked toward it slowly, as though approaching a horse she did not want to startle. She reached out one small hand and touched the carved roses. She looked at the brass handles. She looked at the little face peeking out of the leaves at the top. "Mama," she said softly, "it's beautiful. You think so? It looks like something from a castle. Your Uncle Garrett called it junk." Wren turned around. Her eyes, which were her mother's eyes, were narrowed into a serious 11-year-old expression. "Uncle Garrett doesn't know anything." Marin laughed. It came out of her like a small, surprised sound, the first laugh she had laughed in weeks, and Wren grinned, pleased with herself. "Can I put my clothes in it?" "It's yours, baby. Aunt Addie left it for us." Wren spent the rest of the afternoon working. She folded her shirts in careful stacks. She hung her 2 good dresses on the wooden hanger Marin had found inside. She arranged her shoes along the bottom shelf. She polished the brass handles with a damp washcloth until the green tarnish gave way to a soft, warm gold. She named the little carved face at the top of the armoire. She called him Edmund. Marin sat on Wren's small bed and watched her daughter transform the silent, enormous piece of furniture into something living. That night, after Wren had fallen asleep with one hand resting on the open door of the armoire, as though to keep it company, Marin went to the kitchen table. She sat down. She put the cream envelope from Mrs. Drexler in front of her. She put the photograph from Aunt Addie's mantel beside it. She looked at them both for a long time. Then she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper folded once. The handwriting was the same elegant cursive she remembered from birthday cards she had received as a little girl. My dear Marin, if you are reading this, you have done the thing that none of the others would have done. You have brought the armoire home. You did not sell it. You did not laugh at it. You took it even when they laughed at you for taking it. That is why I chose you. I have left more for you than they know. I will tell you about it in time. But first, I want you to do one small thing. Take a measuring tape. Open the doors of the armoire. Measure the inside very carefully from one side to the other. Then measure the outside from one carved corner to the other. Compare them. When you see the difference, you will understand the rest. Be patient. Be quiet. Do not speak of this to anyone, not even Wren, until you are certain. And when you are certain, my dear, you will find the first of the gifts I have left for you. I am sorry for what you have suffered. I am sorry I did not do more sooner. I tried. I want you to know that. I tried. I see you, Marin. I have always seen you. With all my love on Addie. Marin sat at the kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked. Down the hall, Wren breathed slowly in her sleep. Marin stood up. She walked to the kitchen drawer beside the refrigerator and pulled out the old yellow tape measure that had belonged to her father. She walked back down the hallway. She stood in the doorway of Wren's room. She looked at the armoire. Wren stirred, half asleep. Mama, it's all right, baby. Go back to sleep. But the child sat up. She rubbed her eyes. She watched her mother walk into the room and kneel down in front of the armoire and open the heavy oak doors. Marin measured the outside first. She stretched the tape across the wide carved front of the piece. The number when it stopped was 68 inches. She measured the inside. The tape stopped at 56. She measured again with hands that had begun to tremble. 56. She measured the depth. The outside was 24 inches. The inside was 20. Wren had climbed out of bed. She was kneeling beside her mother in her pajamas, and her face was very serious and very awake. Mama, what does that mean? Marin did not answer at first. She placed her hand flat against the inside wall of the armoire. She pressed. Solid. She moved her hand. She pressed again. She ran her fingers along the seam where the inside panel met the back. She felt nothing. She moved up the carved front. She traced the roses one by one with the pad of her thumb. Her hand stopped. She had reached a rose on the right-hand panel about chest height. It was identical to the others. It was deeply carved. It had 4 open petals and at the very center a small round bud. She pressed the center of the rose. Click. The sound was soft, mechanical, metal moving against wood. It came from somewhere, deep inside the armoire behind the panel, in a place that had been waiting since before Marin was born. The sound was not loud. It did not need to be. In the small bedroom of a third-floor apartment on Hawthorne Street in Cleveland, Ohio, at 9:47 on a Saturday night in late March, that one quiet sound was the loudest thing in the world. Wren grabbed her mother's arm. Mama. Marin did not breathe. She did not move. Her hand stayed on the rose. Behind the carved oak panel, something small and old and patient had just unlatched, and on the other side of that small mechanism, the life she had been living was ending. She turned her head slowly. She looked at her daughter. "Wren." "Mama, what was that?" Maren's voice was very quiet. "I think Aunt Addie just kept a promise." She pressed the rose again. The panel shifted under her fingertips. A narrow seam opened where there had been no seam before. The thing was real. The thing had been real all along. She did not open it yet. She sat back on her heels in the middle of her daughter's small bedroom, with Wren's small hand still on her arm, and the armoire in front of her, and the photograph on the kitchen table, and the letter beside it, and the sky outside the window holding the gray rain over Cleveland. And she understood for the first time in her whole tired life that her Aunt Adelaide Pemberton, the strange spinster aunt with the cluttered house at the end of Ridgewood Lane, the woman she had visited on Sunday afternoons as a child, and then stopped visiting because life was hard and survival was loud, the woman who had been buried 3 weeks ago under a gray sky in front of 3 relatives who could not stop checking their phones, had been a person who had seen her, a person who had loved her, a person who had been waiting in the patient and unhurried way the dead sometimes wait for Maren to find her way to a small, carved rose in a piece of furniture everyone else had called junk. She put her hand on the panel, and she pulled. The panel slid sideways under her hand, smooth and silent, as though it had been oiled and waiting. It moved perhaps 3 inches before it stopped, and through the narrow opening that had appeared, Maren could see only darkness. She did not breathe. Wren did not breathe. The wall clock in the kitchen ticked twice, 3 times 4. The radiator in the living room knocked softly. Somewhere below them in the apartment downstairs, a television was playing the laugh track of an old sitcom, faint and tinny through the floor. Maren reached into her pocket. She had a small keychain flashlight there, the kind you got free with a roadside assistance plan. She had carried it for years. She had never once used it. She pulled it out, now clicked it on and pointed the small white beam into the opening. The light caught something pale and rectangular. She leaned closer. She brought her face within inches of the carved oak. The beam steadied. Paper, wax paper, bundles of it, stacked one on top of another tight against each other, filling the narrow, hidden space from floor to ceiling inside the armoire. Each bundle was perhaps as thick as a deck of cards, perhaps slightly more, and each was bound with what looked like ordinary paper bands, the kind a bank teller might use. "Mama," Wren whispered. Maren did not answer. She could not yet. Her hand moved into the opening on its own, the way a hand moves in a dream, and her fingers closed around the topmost bundle. It was heavy. She pulled it out. She held it in front of her in the lamplight of her daughter's bedroom. She knew before she unwrapped the wax paper what was inside. Some part of her had known since the moment Walter Ainsworth had said the words, "Look closely." Some part of her had known since the moment Mrs. Drexler had pressed the cream envelope into her hand. Some part of her had known her whole life that the strange aunt with the cluttered house had been something more than a strange aunt with a cluttered house. She unwrapped the wax paper anyway. Inside, bound with a single paper band that had no markings on it, was a thick, neat stack of $100 bills. Maren made a sound. It was not a word. It was not a sob. It was the small, involuntary noise a person makes when the floor of their life shifts under them, and they understand in the small, clear second before they fall that nothing is gonna be the same. Wren's hand tightened on her mother's arm. Mama, Mama, is that real? Maren held the bundle in both hands. She turned it slowly. The bills were crisp. The edges were sharp. The portrait of Benjamin Franklin looked up at her with the small, ironic smile he wore on every bill she had ever scanned through her register at Hartman's. I think so, baby. How much is that? Maren counted slowly with her thumb. The bills were strapped in groups of 100. The paper band confirmed it. $10,000. A single bundle. $10,000 in her daughter's bedroom in a third-floor walk-up on Hawthorne Street. She set the bundle on the floor beside her knee. She reached back into the opening with the flashlight. There were more. She did not know how many. She could not see the back of the hidden chamber. She pulled out a second bundle. A third. A fourth. She set each one on the floor beside her in a neat row, and her hands moved faster, and her breath came shorter, and Wren sat back on her heels and watched her mother empty a wool. When the right side chamber was finally empty, Maren stood up. She walked around the armoire. She came back to the left side panel. She knelt down. She found the matching rose. She pressed. Click. The second panel slid. The second chamber opened. The second chamber was just as full. Maren did not cry. She did not laugh. She did not speak. She and her 11-year-old daughter sat on the floor of a small bedroom in Cleveland, Ohio, on a cold Saturday night in March, and they removed wax-papered bundles of $100 bills from the inside of an armoire that her brother had called junk. They stacked them on the floor. They stacked them on the bed. They stacked them on the dresser. When there was no more flat surface in the small room, they stacked them on top of each other. It took an hour to empty the armoire. When the last bundle was out, Maren sat down on the edge of Wren's narrow twin bed. Her legs would not hold her any longer. The room around her was a strange and impossible thing. It looked like a movie set. It looked like a dream. It looked like nothing she had ever seen in a real room in a real life. Mama, Wren whispered. How much is it? Maren breathed in. She breathed out. Get me the notepad from the kitchen, baby, and the pencil, and the calculator. Wren went. She came back. She sat down beside her mother on the floor in the small space between the bed and the armoire with her bare feet tucked under her, and the two of them began to count. They counted for the rest of the night. They counted by piles of 10. They wrote each total on the notepad. They double-checked. They unwrapped 2 random bundles to confirm. Each one held exactly 100 bills. Each one held exactly $10,000. They counted in tens, in 50s, in hundreds. The piles grew taller. The number on the notepad grew larger. Maren's hands moved on their own. Wren leaned against her mother's shoulder and stayed awake by force of will. At 10 minutes past 3 in the morning, Wren counted out the last bundle and placed it on the last pile. Maren wrote the final number on the notepad. 326 bundles. $10,000 each. $3,260,000. She wrote the number out in her own handwriting. She wrote it once in numerals. She wrote it once in words. She stared at the words. $3,260,000. She had written that figure with her own hand in her own kitchen, on her own piece of notepad paper, at 3 in the morning, and she still could not make it look like a real thing. Wren was crying. Maren did not know when her daughter had started. Baby. I don't know why I'm crying, Mama. It's all right. I'm not sad. I just can't stop. Maren pulled the child into her lap. 11 years old, still small enough sometimes to fold against her. She rocked Wren gently in the middle of the small bedroom, with the armoire empty behind them, and the bundles of money spread around them like a strange harvest. It's all right, baby. It's all right. I know. Mama, are we okay now? The question stopped Maren's breath. She did not answer for a long time. Outside the window, the rain that had been spitting all afternoon had finally stopped. Somewhere on Hawthorne Street, a single car drove past, and the headlights moved across the bedroom ceiling slow and ghostly, and were gone. I don't know yet, baby, Maren said softly. I don't know, but I think maybe we are. She did not sleep that night. After Wren had been carried finally to her own bed, after the bundles had been carefully wrapped back into their wax paper and returned to the hidden chambers, and the carved roses had been pressed, and the panels had clicked shut, after the armoire stood once again silent and ordinary in the corner of her daughter's room, Maren went out into the small living room of the apartment and sat down on the second-hand couch and stared at the dark window. She did not cry. She did not move. She thought about the bills. She thought about Mrs. Drexler at the cemetery saying she always saw you. She thought about Walter Ainsworth in the conference room saying look closely. She thought about Garrett's laugh. She thought about Camille's hand over her mouth. She thought about Tate scrolling through his phone at the grave. And then quite suddenly, she thought about the photograph. She got up. She walked to the kitchen table. She picked up the small silver frame with the trembling, careful hands of a woman who had not slept and might not sleep for days. She turned the frame in the light. Atlantic City, June 1965. Aunt Addie, 20 years old, on a beach in a pale dress. The red-haired young man with his hand on her waist. Her face turned up to his. Her face open, unguarded, lit from inside. A face Maren had never seen on Aunt Addie in life. A face that perhaps no one but the red-haired man had ever seen. Maren stood at the kitchen table with the photograph in her hands. The first gray of dawn was beginning to come up over Cleveland. She did not know who the man was, but she knew the way some things are known without proof that he was the reason for everything. The armoire, the hidden chambers, the bundles of paper, the strange spinster aunt who had never married, who had lived alone for 50 years in a house full of furniture that everyone else had called clutter. There was more to find. Maren knew it. She knew it the way an animal knows when the weather is gonna change. The next morning was a Sunday. Wren slept until almost noon. Maren had not slept at all. She had spent the early hours of the morning back in her daughter's room pulling the bundles out one more time. looking past them into the empty, hidden chambers, searching with the small beam of the keychain flashlight. She found it on the second pass. It had been pushed deep into the back of the left-hand chamber, behind where the last bundle had stood. A second envelope. This one was larger than the first, heavier, sealed not with ordinary glue, but with a small wax seal in deep red, pressed with the image of a rose. Her name was on the front. Maren. She did not open it where she was. She carried it out of the bedroom gently, the way a person carries a thing they are afraid to drop. She went to the kitchen. She set the envelope on the table beside the photograph from the mantel. She made coffee slowly, just to give her hands something ordinary to do. And when the coffee was poured and the steam was rising and the apartment was still, and Wren was still sleeping, she sat down and broke the seal. The letter was 11 pages long. Maren read it twice. Then she put her face in her hands, and she sat for a long time at the kitchen table while the coffee went cold, and the morning came in through the small window, and the city of Cleveland began its quiet Sunday outside. My dear Maren, you found it. Of course you did. I am writing this with the certainty that you are reading it because you are the only one in this family who would have. Garrett and Camille would have sold the armoire by Wednesday. Tate would have left it on the curb. You took it home. I owe you the truth now. The whole of it. So I will tell you. And then you will know what kind of woman your aunt was, and you will understand why I have done what I have done. I was 18 years old in 1965. The summer I met Connor Brennan. He was 23. He had come over from County Cork 4 years earlier by himself, with $82 in his shoe and a single change of clothes in a paper bag. By the time I met him, he had already started a small importing business in Cleveland, bringing in linen and woolens from his side of the Atlantic. He was clever. He was patient. He was the most alive man I have ever known. I met him at a wedding of all places. A friend of my mother's was marrying a cousin of his. I was the kind of girl no one looked at, and he looked at me. He looked at me, Maren, the way I have wanted to be looked at every day of my life since. We were married in secret on the 12th of September, 1965. He was 23. I was 18. We told no one. My family would never have accepted him. He was Irish and he was Catholic. And your grandfather, Pemberton, was the kind of man who had opinions about both of those things. Your grandfather would have disowned me. He had told me so when he had simply heard a rumor that I had been seen walking with an Irishman on Euclid Avenue. So we were married in secret by a quiet priest in a small church in Lakewood. We kept 2 apartments. We met at one of them, his, in the evenings. I called my mother every Sunday. I lived a double life. I was happier in those 5 years than I have been in all the years since put together. Connor's business grew. He had a gift for it. By 1968, he had 3 employees. By 1969, he had 8. He was 27 years old, and he was building something, and he was building it for us. He used to tell me on the small back porch of the apartment in Lakewood that one day we would have a house with a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs, and we would sit on it together when we were old, and I would never have to keep our marriage a secret again. He died on the 20th of February, 1970. It was a winter accident on the shoreway. A truck lost control on black ice. The truck driver lived. Connor did not. He was 28 years old. His family in Ireland disowned him for marrying outside the church even after his death. I was his sole legal beneficiary, though. Almost no one knew it. I was 22 years old, and I had been a widow for 11 days. Before I understood that I was now the owner of a business I barely understood. Your grandfather demanded I sell it. I refused. He stopped speaking to me for 9 years. I do not blame him. I had defied him. I had defied him twice, in fact. Once when I married Connor, and once when I refused to give Connor's business back to a world that had not wanted us together. I learned the business. It took me 3 years. I made mistakes. I lost money. I hired the wrong men and fired them. I cried more in those 3 years than I have cried in all the rest of my life combined. But I kept it. I built it. I made it grow. In 1981, I expanded into furniture. In 1989, I expanded into housewares. In 1997, I opened my second warehouse. By 2003, I had 11 employees, 3 trucks, a small office on Lorraine Avenue, and contracts with 17 retailers across 4 states. In 2005, I sold the company. The buyer was a regional distributor based out of Pittsburgh. The sale price, after all negotiations, and after all my lawyer's fees, was $18,200,000. The taxes were paid. The accountants were satisfied. The documents are filed in the records of the Internal Revenue Service of the United States of America. And you may verify any of this through the firm of Ainsworth and Tibbet if you wish, although I do not believe you will need to. I lived comfortably after that, but quietly. I did not change my house. I did not change my car. I did not change the way I dressed. I gave money in small amounts to causes that mattered to me. I gave more in larger amounts anonymously. I lived alone in the house on Ridgewood Lane, and I collected my furniture, and I tended my garden, and I waited. I waited a long time, Marin. I do not know if you knew this, but I came to see you 3 times in the last 10 years. I came once when you were working at the dry cleaner on Lee Road in 2017. I sat in my car across the street and watched you through the window. You were laughing at something a customer had said, and I could not bring myself to go in. I did not know how to begin. I told myself I would come back. I did not. I came again in 2021 when you started at Hartman's Grocery. I stood outside the window for almost an hour. You did not see me. I did not go in. I came once more in the summer of last year. By then, I knew I was running out of time. I stood at the front of your store and I lifted my hand to push the door open, and a woman behind me coughed, and I lost my courage. I turned around. I drove home. I sat on my porch that night, and I wept like a woman of 20, not a woman of 78. And I cursed myself for being a coward. I am sorry, Marin. I am so sorry. I should have come in. I should have come in 50 times. I should have come to your wedding. I should have come when your daughter was born. I should have come when your mother died, and when your father died, and when you got married, and when you got divorced. I should have been there. I was not there. I let your brother and your sister tell me that you were difficult, that you were strange, that you did not want to see family. I let them put a wall between us because it was easier than tearing it down. I have spent the last 3 years of my life trying to make that right. This is what I have left you, I will tell you plainly. I did not want there to be confusion. The cash in the armoire belongs to you. All of it. It is the remainder of what I lived on for 20 years after the sale of the company. I kept it in cash because I did not trust the banks, and because I valued my privacy, and because I am perhaps an old-fashioned woman. The funds are legitimate. The taxes were paid 40 years ago. If you are ever asked, the firm of Ainsworth and Tibbet holds the records, and Walter Ainsworth will assist you in establishing the chain of provenance. You may keep all of it. It is yours. But Marin, listen to me now. Your brother and your sister will come for it. They will not know exactly what they are coming for, but they will come. They are not stupid. They are not patient either, and that will be your advantage. But they are not stupid. The moment your life begins to change, they will see it. The moment you stop looking poor, they will ask why. They will not stop asking. Garrett especially. Do not tell them. Do not tell anyone, in fact, until you have spoken to a lawyer who is not Walter Ainsworth. Walter was my lawyer, and he is bound to my estate, and there will be a conflict of interest. He cannot represent you. Find someone else. There is a woman in town named Diane Mercer. She is at Mercer and Hollis on Prospect. She is sharp, and she is honest, and she is not afraid of men like your brother. Go to her. Tell her everything. Take this letter with you. Use the money slowly, Marin. Not all at once. Pay for things in cash in small amounts. Move when you are ready, but not too soon. Do not deposit large sums into a bank account without a lawyer telling you exactly how to do it. The rules about cash deposits in this country are not kind to people who look like you and me, and they were not built for women who saved their husband's life. Work in a piece of furniture. Give Wren a childhood, my dear. Give her music lessons. Give her books. Give her a bedroom of her own with a window. Give her a mother who is not so tired that she falls asleep at the kitchen table. And give yourself, my dear Marin, the one thing you have never been given. Give yourself permission. You are not the failure of this family. You are the only one in it who has ever known the difference between price and value. You are the only one in it who would have brought the armoire home. You are the only one who deserved any of this. I want you to read that sentence again. You are the only one who deserved any of this. The photograph of Connor is on the mantel in the parlor. I want you to have it. He never met you. He would have liked you. He liked people who survived things. I love you, Marin. I have loved you all along. I am sorry it took me so long to say it out loud. Aunt Addie. P.S. There is something else I should tell you. I had a check performed 3 months ago with a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic. A cognitive evaluation, memory judgment decision-making. I scored a 29 out of 30. The report is on file with my primary care physician, Dr. Helena Marsh, and a sealed copy is held by Walter Ainsworth. I had this done because I knew that the moment any of this came to light, your brother would claim I was not in my right mind. Garrett has always thought that anyone who disagrees with him must be ill. I wanted you to have the proof, just in case. Marin put the letter down. The kitchen was very still. She sat at the small table for a long time. She did not cry. The tears that she had thought were coming did not come. Instead, something else was filling her chest slowly, the way warm water fills a basin. It was not grief. It was not joy. It was something closer to recognition. "I see you," the woman who had been dead for 3 weeks had written. "I have always seen you." Maren got up. She walked into the small living room. She stood in front of the cold radiator with her arms wrapped around herself, and she looked at the gray morning light moving across the floor, and she said softly to the empty room, "I see you too, Aunt Addie." It was the only thing she could think of to say. Wren woke up at noon. She wandered into the kitchen in her pajamas with her hair in a tangle and her eyes still soft with sleep. "Mama," she said, "was that a dream?" "No, baby, it was not a dream." The first week was the hardest. Maren did not call out of work. She went to her shift at Hartman's on Monday morning at 6 and stood at her register and rang up groceries for 9 hours and came home and made dinner and helped Wren with her math homework. And she did this on Tuesday and on Wednesday and on Thursday. And the entire time in the small bedroom at the back of the apartment, $3,260,000 in cash was sleeping inside a piece of furniture that her brother had called junk. She did not tell anyone. She told the woman at the bank on Madison Avenue that she had received a small inheritance and wanted to verify a bill. She handed the teller a single $100 bill from one of the bundles. The teller examined it under ultraviolet light, checked the watermark, ran a finger across the texture, and handed it back with a polite smile. "It's genuine, ma'am." Maren nodded. She thanked the teller. She walked out of the bank and sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time before she could turn the key. She did the same thing at a credit union on Detroit Avenue 2 days later, with a different bill from a different bundle. The result was the same. She did it a third time at a downtown branch of a large national bank. The third bill was also genuine. The money was real. She took her car to the mechanic on Friday afternoon. She had not slept well in 5 nights. The check engine light had been on for almost 5 weeks. The mechanic was a small, bald man named Frank, who had a sign in his window that said, "We fix what the other guy broke." He plugged the diagnostic machine into her car. He read the screen. "Oxygen sensor, throttle position sensor, and your transmission is slipping. You've been driving on borrowed time, ma'am." "How much?" "To do it right, $800 for the sensors, $2,600 for a rebuilt transmission. Call it $3,400 even parts and labor." Maren did not blink. "Can you do it Monday? You got that kind of money, ma'am?" "I have it." Frank looked at her for a long second. He shrugged. "Monday morning. Cash or check?" "Cash." She paid him a $50 deposit out of her wallet. She drove home. She sat in the apartment kitchen, and she cried finally for the first time, not for grief and not for fear, but for the strange, clean, unfamiliar feeling of having said yes to a thing she needed. $800, $2,600, $3,400. In her old life, that number had been the difference between paying rent and not paying rent for 3 months. Now it was the cost of a working car. The transmission was not a tragedy. It was a Monday. That weekend, Maren did something else she had not done in 11 years. She quit her second job. She called the office cleaning company on Saturday morning while Wren was still asleep, and she told the night supervisor that she needed to step away. The supervisor was a tired woman named Janelle, who had heard 1,000 resignations and was not surprised by one more. She told Maren to come in for her final 2 shifts and pick up her last paycheck. She did not ask why. Maren worked her final 2 shifts. She cleaned the 14th floor. She emptied the wastebaskets. She vacuumed the cubicles. She wiped down the break room counter. On the last night, she stood for a moment at the wide windows of the conference room and looked out across the lights of Cleveland, low and yellow, and scattered across the dark. And she thought, I will not be back here. It was a strange thought. It did not feel like victory. It felt like something quieter than that. It felt like the closing of a door she had walked through 5,000 times. When she came home that night at 7 in the evening on a Thursday, 3 weeks after finding the money, Wren was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. The child looked up. She blinked. Mama, you're home early. I'm home, baby. Did something happen? No, baby. Nothing bad. I quit the night job. Wren stared at her. She set down her pencil very carefully, as though it might break. Then she got up out of her chair very slowly, and she walked across the kitchen, and she put her arms around her mother's waist, and she pressed her face into Maren's stomach, the way she used to do when she was 4 years old. She did not say anything. She stood like that for a long time. Maren stroked her daughter's hair, and her own eyes filled, and she did not let the tears fall, because if she let them fall here, she would not stop, and Wren did not need to see that yet. It's okay, baby, she said softly. You're going to be home for dinner now. Yes, baby. Every night. Every night. Wren did not let go for a long time. She moved cautiously after that, the way her aunt had told her to. She paid the rent in cash for May 3 days early. The landlord, a heavy-set man named Mr. Holzer, who had seen everything and was not curious about much, took the bills without comment. She bought Wren a new coat at Macy's, a real coat, dark green wool with a hood, the kind that would last more than one winter. Wren had stared at the price tag for a long moment in the dressing room. Mama, it's $140. I know, baby. That's so much. I know, but your old one doesn't fit anymore. You can't afford that. I can this time, baby. Wren had stood in front of the mirror in the new coat for a long time, looking at herself, looking at her mother behind her in the reflection, and her face had moved through 6 different emotions and finally settled on a careful, complicated thing that was not quite happiness and not quite worry, but something in between. Maren had seen her own face in that look. She had recognized it. It was the face of a girl who had been taught not to want. She bought her daughter shoes that fit. She bought her daughter a backpack that did not have a broken zipper. She bought groceries without checking prices. She paid the electric bill in full instead of in the partial payments she had been making for 3 years. She paid off the small credit card she had carried since the divorce. She paid back the $200 she owed Mrs. Hartwick from a loan made 18 months ago. Mrs. Hartwick had cried when Maren had handed her the cash on the front step. Sweetheart, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, Mrs. Hartwick. I really did. She was careful. She was slow. She did not buy a new car. She did not buy new furniture. She did not change the way she dressed except for one small thing. She bought herself a single pair of leather shoes, the first pair she had owned that had not come from a thrift store, and she wore them to her shift at Hartman's on a Monday morning, and no one noticed. But she noticed. She walked differently in those shoes. The first month passed in a strange suspended quiet. Maren waited every day for something to happen. She waited for a knock on the door. She waited for a phone call. She waited for one of her siblings to look at her too closely. She did not know what shape the trouble would take, but she had read the letter again and again, and she believed every word of it. Your brother will come. He would. She knew he would, but the days kept passing and no one called and no one came. And slowly, Maren began to allow herself the dangerous thing of forgetting. She started looking at apartments. There was a complex on the west side of the city, a quiet place called Maplewood Park, where the buildings had elevators and the laundry rooms were clean and the windows did not stick. The rent was $975 more per month than she was paying now. In her old life, it had been a number so impossible she could have laughed. Now it was just a number on a piece of paper. She filled out an application. She used her job at Hartman's as her sole income. She listed her checking account into which she had been slowly transferring small deposits of cash over the past 5 weeks. Never more than $2,000 at a time. Never 2 deposits in the same week. The application was approved. She and Wren moved in on the last Saturday of April. The new apartment had 2 real bedrooms. The kitchen had a dishwasher. The living room had a window that looked out over a small green courtyard with a single old maple tree just starting to come into leaf. Wren ran from room to room laughing, and Maren stood in the middle of the empty living room and turned slowly in a circle, and she thought, we live here now. She thought it the way a person thinks a sentence in a new language, hesitantly testing whether her mouth will form the words. The armoire came with them, of course. The movers Maren had hired with cash took 4 men to bring it up. They set it against the wall of Wren's new room. It looked different there. In the cramped old apartment on Hawthorne Street, the armoire had loomed. Here in this larger space with its higher ceilings and its better light, the carved oak shone. The roses on the doors caught the late afternoon sun. The little face at the top, Edmund watched the room from his crown of leaves no longer hidden by shadow. Wren refilled the armoire with her clothes. She brought Edmund a small offering of a single dandelion she had picked from the courtyard. She told Maren very seriously that he liked it. Maren did not laugh at her. She believed in Edmund by then. She had begun to believe in a lot of things. It happened when it finally happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early June. 6.5 weeks after the move. 11 weeks after the funeral. Maren had just come home from her shift at Hartman's. She was carrying a paper bag with the ingredients for spaghetti, and she was thinking about whether to call her old colleague Eleanor, who had been asking about getting coffee. She climbed the steps to her new building. She unlocked the lobby door. A woman was standing in the small lobby. She wore a camel coat. She had blonde hair expensively colored. She was carrying a quilted leather handbag with gold chain straps. Her eyes were Maren's mother's eyes exactly, except that they were not warm. "Hello, Maren," said Camille. Maren stopped on the second step from the bottom. The grocery bag was very heavy in her arm. "Camille, nice building. What are you doing here?" "I came to see my sister." You don't know where I live." Camille smiled. The smile did not reach the eyes. "Garrett knows where you live. Garrett knew where you lived an hour after you moved in. He has a guy." Marin did not move. "I'm not here to fight, Marin," Camille said. "I just want to talk. I have nothing to say to you." "It's a nice building," Camille said, again looking around. "It's very nice. The rent must be what, 1,415? Marin did not answer. "2 months ago, you couldn't afford to fix your car, Marin. 2 months ago, you were working 2 jobs and falling asleep on your feet. And now, here you are in a nice apartment, in a nice building, and your daughter is wearing a $140 coat from Macy's, and your check engine light is off. Get out of my building, Camille." "I will, in a minute. I just want to ask you one question." She took one step closer. The lobby was small. Marin could smell her perfume, which was expensive and cold. "What did you find in that armoire, Marin?" The lobby was silent. Outside, a car drove past. Inside, the radiator clanked. Marin stood on the second step from the bottom with a bag of groceries in her arms, and she looked at the sister she had not spoken to since the will reading, and she heard in her head very clearly in Aunt Addie's elegant cursive voice, "Your brother will come for it. They will not know exactly what they are coming for, but they will come." She had been right. Marin walked the rest of the way down the steps. She walked past Camille without looking at her. She reached the front door of the lobby. She held it open. The afternoon air came in cool and clean, smelling of new leaves. "Out," Marin said quietly. "Now." "Marin, out." Camille's mouth tightened. The smile was gone now. The thing underneath it, the thing that had been underneath it for 33 years, was on her face plainly. The girl who had once been teased at school. The woman who had spent her entire life trying to be untouchable. "You think we don't see what's happening? Get out, Camille. Garrett's already talking to a lawyer. Then I will be too." Camille walked past her slowly. She paused in the open doorway. She turned back. Her voice was very soft, the way voices are soft when they want to hurt. "You always thought you were better than us, didn't you, Marin, with your quiet little life and your noble little struggles? You always thought Aunt Addie loved you best." Marin did not answer. "Well, we're gonna find out, aren't we?" She walked out into the afternoon. Her heels clicked across the lobby tile and down the front walk. Marin stood holding the door open until the sound of those heels was gone. She did not move for a long time. Then she let the door swing shut, and she climbed the stairs to the second floor, and she went into her apartment, and she set the groceries down on the kitchen counter, and her hands began to shake so hard she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady them. The piece was over. It had ended in a small lobby in Maplewood Park in Cleveland, Ohio, on a Tuesday in June at 5:37 in the afternoon, and Marin stood in her kitchen with her grocery bag and her shaking hands, and she thought very clearly 3 things at once. Aunt Addie had told her this would happen. Aunt Addie had told her what to do. It was time to call Diane Mercer. She picked up her phone. She found the number she had written down weeks ago and never dialed. She stood in her kitchen with the late afternoon light coming through the window over the sink and the armoire silent in the other room behind her. and she pressed the call button. The phone rang twice. "Mercer and Hollis, this is Diane." "Ms. Mercer," Marin said. "My name is Marin Holloway. My aunt was Adelaide Pemberton. She left me a letter. She told me to call you." There was a small pause on the other end of the line. Then Diane Mercer said very gently, the way a person speaks who has been expecting a call for some time, "Mrs. Holloway, I was hoping you would. When can you come in?" Diane Mercer's office was on the 8th floor of a brick building on Prospect Avenue that had been a department store in another century. The elevator was old and slow. The hallway smelled faintly of furniture polish and printer ink. The frosted glass door at the end of the hall said, "Mercer and Hollis Attorneys at Law," in plain black lettering, and below it in smaller letters, "Estate and Probate." Marin had taken the morning off from Hartman's. She had told the manager that her dentist had needed to see her early. The lie had come out smoothly the way her lies came out now. She had begun to understand in the past 3 months that there were 2 kinds of lies. There were the lies you told to hurt people, and there were the lies you told to keep yourself alive. She did not feel guilty about the second kind anymore. She walked into the office. A woman behind a small wooden desk looked up. "Mrs. Holloway." "Yes." "Miss Mercer is expecting you. Go on through." Diane Mercer was somewhere in her late 50s. She had gray-streaked dark hair pulled back into a low knot and reading glasses on a thin gold chain around her neck, and the kind of steady, unhurried gaze that made Marin think immediately that Aunt Addie had chosen well. She stood up from behind a desk piled with neat folders, and she extended her hand, and her handshake was firm. "Mrs. Holloway, sit down. Coffee?" "Yes, please." The coffee came in a heavy white mug. Diane Mercer sat down across from her. She did not open a folder. She did not pick up a pen. She folded her hands on the desk and she looked at Marin and she said, "Tell me please from the beginning." So Marin told her. She told her about the funeral and the will reading. She told her about Walter Ainsworth's quiet words after the others had left. She told her about Mrs. Drexler at the cemetery and Mrs. Drexler at the lilac hedge. She told her about the armoire and the carved rose and the click and the wax paper bundles and the long night of counting on Wren's bedroom floor. She told her about the photograph from the mantelpiece. She told her about the 11-page letter from her aunt, which she had brought in her bag. She set the letter on the desk between them, and Diane Mercer put on her reading glasses and she read it from beginning to end without speaking. And when she was done, she took the glasses off slowly and set them down on top of the letter. She looked at Marin. "How much, Mrs. Holloway?" $3,260,000. Diane Mercer nodded once. "And your sister came to your building yesterday?" "Yes." "Did she say her brother had retained a lawyer?" "She said he was talking to one." "Did she record the conversation?" Marin paused. "I don't know." "Assume that she did. Assume that he did. Assume that everything you say to your siblings from this point forward is being preserved. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Good. Now listen carefully." Diane Mercer leaned forward. "You have 3 options. The first is to do nothing. Continue as you have been. Hope that your brother runs out of patience or money before he runs out of room to maneuver. I do not recommend this option. Your brother sounds like a man who does not run out of either. He doesn't. The second is to settle. Offer him and your sister a portion of the money in exchange for a signed agreement that they will not contest the inheritance. This is fast. It is clean. It avoids a courtroom. It also rewards a man who has bullied you your entire life. And it gives him hundreds of thousands of dollars of money that your aunt, very specifically, did not want him to have. I won't do that. I didn't think you would. What's the third option? The third option, Diane Mercer said, is that we go on the offensive. Today, this afternoon, we file with the probate court ourselves before your brother does. We disclose the discovered funds. We attach your aunt's letter as evidence of her intent. We attach a copy of the certified sale documents from your aunt's business in 2005, which established the legitimate origin of the cash. And we attach Mrs. Holloway your aunt's cognitive evaluation from 3 months before her death. Marin stared at her. You already know about that. Walter Ainsworth and I have known each other for 26 years. He could not call me directly about your case, but he was permitted to confirm when I asked that certain documents existed in his file. Aunt Addie knew. She knew it would come to this. Your Aunt Mrs. Holloway knew exactly what she was doing. From the very first day she walked into Walter Ainsworth's office to draft her will, she knew. She was not a sentimental woman. She was a strategic one. She loved you, and she planned for you, and she put weapons in your hands before you ever knew you would need them. Our job now is to use them. Marin sat back in the chair. She drank her coffee. It had gone cold. She did not notice. All right, she said quietly. Let's do it. Diane Mercer filed the petition that Friday afternoon. The notice went out to Garrett Holloway and to Camille Sullivan Vance the following Monday. Marin did not see them open the envelopes, but she could imagine it. She could imagine the precise expression that would have come over her brother's face when he read the first paragraph. She could imagine Camille's hand go into her mouth. She could imagine also the slow, controlled, predatory smile that would have followed. Their counterpetition was filed 9 days later. It claimed in the bloodless language of probate law that Adelaide Pemberton had concealed a significant portion of her estate from proper inventory, that this concealment constituted a fraud upon the lawful heirs, that the discovered funds should be returned to the estate and redistributed equally among all 4 nieces and nephews, and that the recipient of the Armoire One, Marin Holloway, had acted in bad faith by failing to disclose the discovery for a period of several months. The hearing was set for the 18th of July. 3 weeks, Diane Mercer said. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks of careful breathing. The day before the hearing, on the 17th of July, the doorbell rang at the Maplewood Park apartment at 6:45 in the evening. Wren was in the living room doing a puzzle. Marin was in the kitchen cutting vegetables for stir-fry. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to the front door and looked through the peephole. It was Garrett. He was alone. He was wearing a navy blazer over a white shirt, no tie. The Rolex caught the hallway light. Marin did not open the door. What do you want, Garrett? I want to talk. You can talk through the door. Marin, open the door. No. There was a small silence. Then his voice lowered the way it got when he was about to play his soft and reasonable card. Marin, I'm trying to help you here. We don't have to do this tomorrow. We can settle this tonight between us like family. I drove out here on a Tuesday night. The least you can do is open the door. I don't want to settle. You don't even know what I'm going to offer. I don't care what you're going to offer. Go home, Garrett." He was silent for a moment. "You are going to lose tomorrow, Marin. You understand that, don't you? You are not going to win this. The judge is going to look at a woman who worked at a grocery store 6 months ago and now lives in a $1,500 apartment, and the judge is going to ask where the money came from, and you are going to say, 'My weird aunt hid $3 million in a piece of furniture and left me a note.' Marin, listen to yourself. Listen to how that sounds. It sounds true. It sounds insane. You're not coming in, Garrett. Open the door, Marin." No. He hit the door once with the flat of his hand, not hard enough to alarm a neighbor. Just hard enough for her to hear it on her side, less than a foot from her face. A reminder. A small statement of what he could do. "You stupid woman," he said quietly through the door. "You have no idea what you've started." Then he was gone. Marin heard his footsteps go down the hallway and to the stairwell, and she stood with her back against the door and her hand pressed flat against the wood, and her breath was very shallow, and her body would not stop trembling. Wren came around the corner from the living room. "Mama." "It's all right, baby." That was Uncle Garrett. "Yes. I heard what he said." Marin knelt down. She put her hands on her daughter's shoulders. "Wren, look at me, baby." Wren looked at her. "He is wrong. About tomorrow. And about me. And about you. Do you understand me?" "Yes. Tomorrow I am going to go to a courtroom and I am going to stand up in front of a judge and I am going to tell the truth. And nothing your uncle says is going to change that. Do you understand?" Wren nodded slowly. "Mama, are you scared?" Marin breathed in. "Yes, baby, I am scared. But I'm also going to do it anyway." "Why?" "Because I am your mother. And because Aunt Addie believed I could." Wren put her small arms around her mother's neck in the hallway of the apartment on the second floor of Maplewood Park. And she held on for a long moment. And Marin held her back. And outside the apartment building, the summer evening was settling in over Cleveland with a soft gold light. Marin slept that night. Not well. But she slept. The courtroom of the Cuyahoga County Probate Court was paneled in dark wood and lit by old chandeliers. Marin sat at a long table on the left side of the room beside Diane Mercer, and across the aisle at a matching table sat Garrett and Camille, and a tall, thin lawyer in a gray suit named Roland Strake. Tate had not come. Marin was in some small way glad of this. The judge was a woman in her 60s named the Honorable Lorraine Bishop. She had iron-colored hair pulled back severely, and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a long face that did not give anything away. She had been on the probate bench for 19 years. She had seen Diane Mercer had told Marin in the elevator, every kind of family that money could ruin. The hearing began at 10 in the morning. Mr. Strake for the petitioners spoke first. He was articulate, he was precise. He laid out a case that Marin had to admit sounded reasonable when it was spoken aloud. Adelaide Pemberton had declared an estate of approximately $296,000. The discovery of an additional $3 million in cash, concealed within a piece of furniture, was either an unreported asset of the estate or in the alternative evidence of a long-running scheme to evade tax and probate obligations. The cash properly inventoried belonged to the estate and should be divided equally among the lawful heirs. The respondent, Mrs. Marin Holloway, had retained the funds without disclosure. This was not innocent. This was concealment. Marin listened. Her hands in her lap were cold. Mr. Strake sat down. Judge Bishop turned to Diane Mercer. Ms. Mercer. Diane Mercer stood. She walked slowly to the small lectern at the front of the room. She did not raise her voice. She did not raise her hands. She spoke the way Marin imagined Aunt Addie might have spoken. If Aunt Addie had been a lawyer in her 60s with 26 years of practice, she introduced the will of Adelaide Pemberton with its specific bequest of the carved oak armoire to Marin Holloway. She introduced Adelaide Pemberton's 11-page letter, which she presented to the bailiff, and which the bailiff carried to the judge. She introduced the certified records of the 2005 sale of Pemberton imports, with the corresponding federal tax filings from 2005, 2006, and 2007, showing that all capital gains had been properly reported and the full sum of taxes paid. She introduced a brief sworn statement from Walter Ainsworth, confirming that he had counseled Adelaide Pemberton on the structure of her estate over a period of 14 years, and that in his professional opinion she had been mentally competent and fully aware of her decisions at every stage. Judge Bishop read the letter slowly. The courtroom was silent while she did. Marin watched the judge's face. The judge's face did not change, but her eyes lingered on certain pages longer than on others. When she set the letter down, she said, "Ms. Mercer, please continue." Your Honor, I would also like to call as a witness Mrs. Imogene Drexler of 224 Ridgewood Lane, Cleveland, who was Ms. Pemberton's neighbor for 32 years. Mrs. Drexler had been sitting in the second row of the gallery in her gray shawl and her sensible shoes with her cane upright between her knees. She rose now slowly, and the bailiff helped her to the witness stand, and she was sworn in with her thin paper hand on the Bible. She told the court about Adelaide Pemberton. She told them about the woman who had lived next door to her for 32 years. The woman who had brought her chicken soup when her husband had died in 2003. The woman who had read 3 newspapers a day until the very last week of her life. The woman who 3 years before her death had begun speaking more and more often about her niece. The one in the apartment, the one who worked too hard. The woman who, 4 months before her death, had given Mrs. Drexler a sealed envelope to be delivered in person only after Marin had taken the armoire home. She knew, Mrs. Drexler said simply. She knew exactly what was going to happen, and she knew exactly who she was leaving things to. There was not one single confused moment in that woman's last year of life. Not one. And I would say so on any Bible you put in front of me. Mr. Strake rose to cross-examine. Mrs. Drexler, you are 86 years old, is that correct? 87. You yourself are not in perfect health, are you? Mrs. Drexler tilted her head very slightly. Young man, I take 2 pills a day. I drive my own car. I balance my own checkbook. I beat my own grandson at chess. Would you like a game? A small ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom. Mr. Strake's neck reddened. He did not have another question. He sat down. Mrs. Drexler stepped down from the witness stand. As she passed Marin's table, she paused. She did not look at Garrett or at Camille. She looked at Marin. She placed one thin hand very briefly on Marin's shoulder. Then she went back to her seat in the gallery. Diane Mercer turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the evidence before the court establishes the following. Adelaide Pemberton legitimately earned, declared, and paid taxes on the funds in question, beginning more than 20 years ago. She chose for her own private reasons to keep a portion of those funds in cash. She specifically bequeathed the armoire containing those funds to her niece, Marin Holloway, and she did so with full mental competence and with the explicit knowledge of what the armoire contained. The petitioner's claim that this was concealment from the estate is not supported by the facts. The funds were never in the estate. They were a separate, intentional lifetime gift to a specific person made within a specifically designated container." She paused. "The petitioners have not, in fact, alleged any actual wrongdoing by Ms. Pemberton. They have alleged only that her wishes are inconvenient to them. We respectfully request that the court confirm Mrs. Holloway's ownership of the funds and dismiss the petitioner's claim." She sat down. The judge looked at Mr. Strake. "Mr. Strake, any response?" Mr. Strake stood. And it was here at this moment that he played the card Diane Mercer had been waiting for. "Your Honor, we have not until this point in the proceedings raised this matter out of respect for the family, but the circumstances now compel us to. We submit to the court that Adelaide Pemberton in the last year of her life was not in fact mentally competent to execute the kind of intricate, secretive, and unconventional bequest that Ms. Mercer is asking the court to enforce. We have obtained the sworn affidavit of Dr. Reginald Bowers, a private geriatric psychiatrist, who reviewed Ms. Pemberton's available medical records and reports a strong likelihood of undiagnosed early-stage dementia. We submit that the so-called letter Ms. Mercer has introduced is the product of a mind that was at best suggestible, at worst manipulated." He laid the affidavit on the bailiff's desk. "We have reason to believe, Your Honor, that the niece, Marin Holloway, took advantage of an elderly woman in cognitive decline, and that the entire scheme involving the armoire was orchestrated in whole or in part by Mrs. Holloway herself." The courtroom went very still. Garrett was watching Marin. He was not smiling. His face was a careful arrangement of grave concern, the face he had practiced for this moment. Camille was watching her shoes. Marin felt the heat rise into her face. Her hands clenched in her lap. She did not look at her brother. She had practiced not looking at her brother. Diane Mercer's hand under the table found her wrist and held it firmly. "Steady," Diane Mercer murmured. Judge Bishop turned slowly. She looked at Diane Mercer over the top of her reading glasses. "Ms. Mercer, response." Diane Mercer stood. She walked to her table. She opened the second folder, the one she had not yet touched. She removed a single document. She walked it to the bailiff. The bailiff carried it to the bench. "Your Honor, we anticipated this argument. With respect to Dr. Bowers, who never examined Ms. Pemberton in person, I would like to introduce into evidence a formal cognitive evaluation administered to Adelaide Pemberton on December 7th of last year. The evaluation was conducted by Dr. Helena Marsh of the Cleveland Clinic. a board-certified geriatrician with 31 years of practice and no prior or subsequent relationship to the Pemberton family. The evaluation was, I would note for the court, requested by Ms. Pemberton herself. She made the appointment. She drove herself to it. She paid for it out of her own pocket. She did so without prompting from anyone. The results. Diane Mercer paused. 29 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Full retention of recent and remote memory. Full orientation to person, place, and time. Full executive function. Dr. Marsh's written conclusion attached to the report was that Ms. Pemberton displayed, and I quote, a cognitive sharpness rare for her age and consistent with full legal capacity. The full report is included for the court. She returned to her seat. She did not sit down right away. Ms. Pemberton requested this evaluation, Your Honor, 3 months before her death. She did so because she anticipated with what now seems remarkable accuracy that her nephew, Garrett Holloway, might attempt exactly this argument. Her letter to her niece, which the court has now read, refers to the existence of this report. She was, Your Honor, ahead of her family at every step. She remained ahead of them until the day she died. And she is still ahead of them this morning in this courtroom. Diane Mercer sat down. The courtroom was very, very quiet. Marin did not look at Garrett. She did not need to. She heard behind her a single, small, sharp breath, and she knew without turning her head that the breath had come from Camille. Judge Bishop read the cognitive report. She read it slowly the way she had read the letter. She looked up. Mr. Strake, anything further? Mr. Strake stood. He glanced sideways at Garrett. Garrett was sitting very still. Mr. Strake cleared his throat. Your Honor, in light of the evidence just submitted, the petitioners would request a brief recess to confer. No, said Judge Bishop. It was the first time she had raised her voice, even slightly, all morning. No, Mr. Strake, I have read the will. I have read the letter. I have read the tax filings. I have read the cognitive evaluation administered by an independent physician at the Cleveland Clinic. I've heard the testimony of a neighbor who lived next door to the decedent for 32 years. I'm prepared to rule from the bench. She removed her reading glasses. She folded them carefully and set them on the desk in front of her. This court finds that Adelaide Catherine Pemberton was of sound mind at the time she executed her last will and testament. At the time, she drafted the letter dated October the 17th of last year, and at every other relevant moment in her final year of life. This court further finds that the funds discovered within the carved oak armoire bequeathed to Mrs. Marin Holloway constituted a specific lifetime gift contained within a specifically designated container and intended by Ms. Pemberton without ambiguity to pass exclusively to Mrs. Holloway. This court finds no evidence of fraud, no evidence of concealment by the decedent, and no evidence of wrongdoing by Mrs. Holloway. The petition of Mr. Holloway and Mrs. Sullivan Vance is denied. The funds in question are confirmed as the sole and lawful property of Mrs. Marin Holloway. She paused. One additional note for the petitioners. The court has reviewed the affidavit of Dr. Bowers and finds it to be of negligible weight, given that Dr. Bowers never examined the decedent in life and reached his opinion based on a review of selectively provided records. Mr. Strake, I would advise you going forward to be cautious of affidavits of this nature. They reflect poorly on counsel." Mr. Strake had gone very still. "Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Sullivan Vance, I will say this to you both, and I will say it plainly. The court does not exist to repair the affection your aunt did not feel obligated to give you. The court is not a mechanism for the relitigation of family grievances. Whatever your aunt's reasons were for choosing your sister over you, those reasons were hers to have. If you persist in attempting to disturb this bequest, this court will not be sympathetic." She struck the gavel once. "This matter is closed." It was 11:43 in the morning. Marin did not move. She sat at the table beside Diane Mercer, and she heard the rustle of papers being gathered behind her, the squeak of chairs, the low murmur of someone saying something to Garrett. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the front of the courtroom, on the empty bench where Judge Bishop had been, on the heavy paneled wall behind it, and she let the silence in her own chest go on for as long as it needed to. Diane Mercer touched her arm. "Mrs. Holloway, it's done." Marin turned her head finally. The courtroom was emptying. Garrett was already at the back doors. He did not look at her. Camille was at his elbow, walking quickly, head down. Mr. Strake was speaking to them in low, urgent tones. Marin watched her brother and sister walk out of her life through the heavy oak doors of the Cuyahoga County Probate Court, and she felt in her chest something complicated. It was not triumph. It was not satisfaction. It was, she realized slowly, the quiet shutting of a door she had been holding open for a very long time, hoping that someone she loved would walk back through it. No one walked back through. She had known for a long time that they would not. But there had always been the hope. There was no more hope. And the absence of hope, strange to say, was a kind of peace. She stood up. Diane Mercer was watching her carefully. "Are you all right, Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes. You don't have to be all right yet. It is permitted to not be all right for a little while." Marin smiled. It was small, but it was real. "I think I'm going to be all right, Ms. Mercer." Diane. Diane. They walked out of the courtroom together. Garrett and Camille did not speak to her after that day. They did not call. They did not write. They did not appear at her building. Garrett did, however, send one final message 2 weeks after the hearing in the form of a registered letter from his attorney, declining any further contact with Mrs. Marin Holloway. The letter was 3 sentences long. It was in its way the most honest thing her brother had ever said to her. She kept the letter in a folder. She did not throw it away. She wanted sometimes to look at it the way a person looks at a fossil, to remind herself that the thing had really existed. Tate, of all of them, reached out. He sent her a text message in the first week of August. It said, "Marin, I was wrong. I should have stood up for you at the lawyer's office. I should have stood up for you at a lot of places. Aunt Addie was good to me, and I never deserved it. She told me once when I was about 16 that I was going to grow up to be like Garrett if I wasn't careful. I think she was trying to warn me. I think I didn't listen. I'm sorry. If you ever want to get coffee, I would like that." Marin stared at the message for a long time. She wrote back, "There is a diner on Detroit Avenue called May's. Saturday at 10. Bring Wren a small thing. She has missed having cousins. Tate brought Wren a stuffed otter and a book about marine biology. He sat across from Marin and Wren in a vinyl booth at May's, and he ate too many pancakes. And he talked about how he was thinking of going back to school. And Marin did not entirely believe him about the school. But she watched him with her daughter, and she saw the small wounded thing in him that had always been there. The thing that Garrett had never had, the thing that perhaps Aunt Addie had once been trying to reach. She did not know if Tate would change, but he had come. He had been the only one who had come. That was in the end a fact. She did not give him money. He did not ask. They had a strange, careful, useful breakfast, and they parted on the sidewalk under the August sun, and Wren waved at him through the back window of the car as they pulled away, and Tate stood on the curb of Detroit Avenue and waved back until he was a small figure in the rearview mirror. She did not stop working at Hartman's. She thought about it. She thought about it more than once. But there were two things keeping her there. The first was a woman named Maribel at the bakery counter whose husband had walked out on her in February, who had 3 children and a chronic back injury, and who more than once had needed someone to take a shift. Marin had been the someone more times than she could count over the years. She did not want to leave Maribel without that someone. The second was that Marin did not in some deep and complicated way want to stop being the woman who had stood at that register. She did not want to forget. She did not want Wren to forget. She reduced her hours. She worked Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Saturdays. She kept her uniform. The rest of her week was full. She enrolled in an online program at Cleveland State to finish the business degree she had abandoned at 19. She studied at the kitchen table in the evenings while Wren did her own homework across from her. She took her time. She did not rush. She had learned by then that time was the one thing the money had truly bought her. She moved the cash slowly and carefully, and under Diane Mercer's guidance, into legitimate accounts and conservative investments. The financial advisor she had hired was a woman named Christine Park, who did not blink at the figures and did not ask intrusive questions, and who built over the course of 6 months a quiet portfolio designed to last Marin and Wren for the rest of their natural lives. The funds grew, modestly, the way money grows when it is treated with respect. Marin bought a house eventually, not a mansion, not a statement. A small 2-story brick on a quiet street in Lakewood, with a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs, and a garden bed in the front, where Wren planted snapdragons in the spring. She bought it in cash. The realtor's office had stared at the wire transfer for a long minute, and then had asked no further questions. She moved the armoire into the new house, by which is meant she hired movers who knew what they were doing, and she stood on the porch in a cardigan with a cup of coffee in her hand, and she watched 4 large men carry the piece of furniture that had changed her life through the front door of the home that her aunt had bought for her. She placed it in Wren's new bedroom. She placed Aunt Addie's letter in a simple black frame on the wall above it. She placed the photograph of Aunt Addie and Connor Brennan, June 1965, on the small bedside table, where Wren could see it every night before she went to sleep. She told Wren the whole story eventually, all of it. The marriage in secret, the young Irish husband, the car accident, the 40 years of careful labor, the $18 million sale, the hidden bundles, the carved roses. The patient old woman who had waited and waited and finally, in the only way she had been able, had reached across the silence of 3 decades to a niece she had been too afraid to walk back into. "She came to the store, Mama," Wren said one evening on the porch. "3 times. She never came in." "Why didn't she?" "I don't know, baby. I think she was afraid I would not want her there." "Would you have wanted her there?" Marin thought about that for a long time. "I think," she said softly, "that I would have not known what to do with her. I think I would have been ashamed of the apron, of the broken car in the parking lot, of the way my life looked. I think she knew that. I think that's why she stayed in her car. That's sad. Yes, baby, it is sad. But she found a way. She found a way." Wren leaned against her mother's shoulder on the porch swing. "I wish I had known her, Mama. You know her now, baby. You know her better than I did for most of my life. She wrote you a letter that runs to 11 pages. She put a fortune in a piece of furniture for you. She is in this house. She is in everything we have. You know her, Wren." The girl was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to name my daughter Adelaide," Wren said, "if I ever have one." Marin smiled into the gathering dark. She would like that, baby. She would like that very much. 2 years passed. Wren turned 13. She started a new school. She joined the debate team, and she discovered to her mother's surprise that she liked to argue and was good at it. She took up the violin. She was not very good at the violin, but she practiced anyway. And her music teacher said the practicing mattered more than the talent. Marin was inclined to agree. Marin finished her degree. She walked across the stage of the Wolstein Center in a black gown at the age of 38, while Wren sat in the audience holding a bouquet of yellow tulips, and a part of Marin, the part that was still standing at the register of Hartman's grocery at 3 in the afternoon, on a Thursday in late March, looked at the woman walking across the stage and did not quite recognize her. She started a small business after that, a financial coaching practice for single mothers. She did not advertise. She worked by referral. She charged on a sliding scale, and for many of her clients, she charged nothing at all. She helped them open bank accounts. She helped them read pay stubs. She helped them understand interest rates. She helped them mostly by sitting across from them at a kitchen table and saying out loud the things she wished someone had said to her 10 years earlier. She used some of the money for that. Not much. She did not need much. The money was by then a quiet thing in the background of her life, working slowly the way a river works on stone. She established in the 3rd year a scholarship. She established it through a small foundation that Diane Mercer helped her set up. She named it the Adelaide Pemberton Fund. It provided 2-year scholarships with full living stipends for women over the age of 30 who wished to return to school. The first year, the fund supported 3 women. The second year, 6. The third year, 12. At the 3rd year's dedication ceremony in a modest reception room on the campus of Cleveland State University, Marin stood at a small lectern in a navy blue dress, and she looked out at the women who had come, and she spoke about her aunt. She did not speak about the money. She spoke about Connor Brennan, the young Irish importer who had died in 1970. She spoke about a young woman, 22 years old, who had been told to sell her dead husband's business and refused. She spoke about the long decades of work in a small office on Lorraine Avenue. She spoke about Sunday afternoons in a cluttered house on Ridgewood Lane. She spoke about the day she had stood in a lawyer's conference room and been mocked for receiving an armoire. She spoke finally about being seen. My aunt used to collect things that other people called junk, she said quietly. She did not collect them because they were valuable. She collected them because she could see what they had been and what they could be again. She did the same thing with people. She saw what we had been. She saw what we could be again. She paused. I had given up by the time she reached me. I had given up entirely. I did not know it. You don't know it when you have given up. You think you are still trying. You think you are still hoping. But somewhere in the middle of the long, quiet life of doing what you have to do, the trying stops, and you do not even notice that it has stopped. She looked out at the room. She noticed. She noticed for me when I could not notice for myself. That is what she gave me. The money was the smaller gift. She stepped back from the lectern. The room applauded. Some of the women in the front row were crying. Maren walked back to her table where Wren, 13 years old now, and almost as tall as her mother, was waiting. Wren stood up. She put her arms around her mother's waist. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The armoire still stood in Wren's bedroom, in the little brick house in Lakewood. It was empty of bundles now, of course. The hidden chambers behind the carved roses were dark and silent and waiting for the next thing that needed hiding. Although Maren had not yet found anything that needed it, she kept her grandmother's wedding ring in there in a small velvet box. Wren kept her diary in there. Sometimes Maren would stand in front of the armoire in the morning light with her coffee in her hand, and she would put her palm flat against the carved oak, and she would say very quietly to no one, "I see you." She did not always know who she was saying it to. Sometimes it was Aunt Addie. Sometimes it was Connor Brennan, the young red-haired man in the photograph, who had loved a girl in secret in 1965 and had died too young in 1970 and had left somehow across 56 years, the seed of a fortune that had reached down through time and changed a woman's life. Sometimes it was herself. Sometimes it was the woman who had stood at the register of Hartman's grocery under the flickering fluorescent lights, ringing up milk and bread and generic cereal at 1947, with a check engine light on in the parking lot, and an 11-year-old daughter waiting at home with frozen pizza for dinner, and a heart that had forgotten what hope felt like. That woman was still in her. She would always be in her. Maren had decided a long time ago that she did not want to forget her. The forgetting would have been a kind of betrayal. So she kept the apron from Hartman's folded in the bottom drawer of her dresser. She kept the dented sedan in the garage of the little brick house in Lakewood even though she did not drive it anymore. She kept her old name tag in a small wooden box on the mantel. She kept the photograph of Aunt Addie and Connor on the bedside table in Wren's room. The two young people on a beach in Atlantic City in June of 1965. A woman just becoming herself. A man holding her at the waist. The wind in the pale dress. The whole future ahead of them, undisturbed, unbroken, full of light. Wren stood in her bedroom doorway one evening in the early autumn when she was almost 14. She watched her mother stand in front of the armoire with her coffee in her hand. She watched her mother place her palm flat against the carved oak. Mama, Yes, baby. What do you say to it when you stand there? Maren turned. Her daughter was tall now, and would soon be taller than she was. The light from the bedroom lamp behind Wren caught her hair and made a soft golden halo at the edge of her shape. I say thank you, baby. To Aunt Addie, and to Connor, and to all the people who came before us who built something, even when no one was watching, even when they were not loved properly, even when the world did not see them. Wren came into the room. She stood beside her mother. She put her own small hand on the carved oak beside her mother's hand. Thank you, Wren whispered. The two of them stood that way for a long moment, mother and daughter in front of a piece of furniture that a man in a Rolex had once called junk in a small brick house in Lakewood, Ohio. While the early autumn evenings settled across the city and the lights began to come on one by one in the houses up and down the street, the treasure had never been the money. The treasure had been the seeing. Aunt Addie had seen Maren. Maren had seen Wren. Wren would see her own children someday if she had them the way her mother and her great-aunt had seen her. That was the inheritance. That was the thing that had been hidden all along in the carved oak armoire on Ridgewood Lane. That was the thing that no judge could divide, and no brother could claim, and no lawyer could contest, and no flickering fluorescent light could fade. That was the thing that had been worth the waiting.